Thank you and hello. My name is Anshul Mangal. I am the president of Precision Advanced and Project Pharma. It's my pleasure to moderate this discussion, and thank you to ARM for hosting us. This topic is near and dear to all of us. Since 2013, Precision's interdisciplinary teams, including Precision for Medicine, Project Pharma, and Precision Value in Health, have been advancing clinical, manufacturing, commercialization solutions to help innovators transform patient lives. Having been a partner to over 100 advanced therapy organizations, we know that delivering a cell and gene therapy to market requires a comprehensive and integrated approach. Therefore, we're pleased to introduce Precision Advanced, which focuses on these therapies and what's required to bring these therapies successfully to market. In our panel today, we'll be hearing from various experts on these complexities. They will give us an update on their respective companies, their pipeline, and where they're at in their development process. We will also hear about the current challenges and predictions for the industry moving forward. So now I'll briefly introduce the panelists. Joining us today are Robert Ang, who's President and CEO of vore Biopharma, Deb Phippard, Chief Scientific Officer for Precision for Medicine. Welcome, Debs.
Thank you.
Brent Rice, Senior Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer for Autolus Therapeutics. And last but not least, Johanna Russell, Chief Commercial Officer for zavon. So I'll start with you, Robert. Can you give us a brief update on where vore is and its path to development of cell therapies?
Sure. So vore is a company working on two different modalities in cell therapies. Hematopoietic stem cells, where we are gene modifying these cells to become resistant to targeted therapy. And we're also working on traditional CAR-Ts, both single binders as well as multi-specific binders. We're in the clinic right now, which is very exciting, and if you want to learn more, you can come visit my presentation tomorrow.
Thanks, Robert. Brent, Autolus is developing advanced autologous T-cell therapies to change the lives of patients living with cancer. Love to learn more about Autolus and its pipeline from you.
Yeah, thanks, Anshul. So, hi, everybody. I'm Brent Rice. Autolus was founded in 2014 out of University College London with Martin Poulet as the Chief Scientific Officer. We're developing next-generation program T-cell therapies that are focused on hematologic malignancies, solid tumors, multiple myeloma, both autologous and allogeneic.
Thanks, Brent. Johanna, can you first start by giving the audience some insight into zavon and the work you're doing to commercialize advanced therapies?
Hello, everybody. zavon, our lead asset, is called reimbursement, and reimbursement is a one-time therapy. It's a tissue-based for patients with congenital atamia. And congenital atamia is the kids that are born without thymus, and it's an ultra-rare disease. And as you may imagine, without thymus, they have a lot of infections. Their natural history is that they will live until around 3 years old. And we are the first product approved to treat congenital atamia, and one of the first drugs that was approved in the US under the new regenerative medicine advanced therapies. So in terms of the commercial, and as you can see, ultra rare, and also we have only one treatment center. So our approach is very focused. We focus on two areas. One, educate our payers and our key stakeholders on our long-term data and the value of the asset. And the second part is provide services and patient support for the families of these kids, and also for the referring physicians to be able to, go through the pathway of getting the kids treated, and also the reimbursement journey. And we also have efforts into contributing with a better supply for the drug in the US and expanding in Europe and in other areas.
Thank you, Johanna. Debs, can you provide more information on how your business within Precision is helping advanced therapy innovators progress their science?
Yeah, sure, love to. So Precision supports clinical studies for cell and gene therapy. We have extensive translational labs. So we might be doing any number of assays in the cell and gene therapy space, but something that's really near and dear to my heart right now, keeps me up at night, is what does immunogenicity mean in the context of cell and gene therapy. So something we're particularly doing is really thinking about what assays do we need to launch a gene therapy. Do we truly need a companion diagnostic? That's certainly something that's a very hot issue for a lot of the clients I'm working with right now. They often come to us hoping it's going to be a simple total antibody assay. We start working with them, we're discussing things. Often comes about, have you thought about maybe it needs to be a neutralizing antibody assay? We'll go to the regulatory agencies with them. We've had a few somewhat nasty surprises, thinking we're going to have a very simple, straightforward assay. We get early regulatory feedback, thankfully early. We've got time to build those assays. But I'd say where we're really making an impact right now is truly in the immunogenicity space, as well as thinking about efficacy, are we on target, distribution, persistence. So really, what Precision's all about is engaging with our clients to be able to think about the best strategy to get these amazing therapeutics into the clinic.
Thanks, Debs. Now, we just had a really riveting discussion on the state of investments of advanced therapies, and certainly it's a topic that's on everyone's minds right now. I would love to get some of your guys' thoughts on this discussion as well. And Robert, love to start with you. And obviously the past few years, cell and gene therapy sector has flourished, and investor confidence has been extremely high. With the downturn of the current public markets, do you think that investor confidence will continue?
Yeah, I think. Look, let's face it, we're in a 15-month record biopharma rout in the public markets now. This rout is very much reflected in private companies, as was described in the last panel. And we're also seeing it now, even in terms of the employee base, with multiple layoffs going on. Now, just in general, though, as also the last panel alluded to, cell and gene therapies are treated a little bit differently in the therapeutic space, where I think on one hand you may have increased risk on the CMC standpoint, but you probably have decreased risk in terms of overall mechanism, understanding of that mechanism, and early proof of concept in the clinic. And so I think in that sense, there is this different dynamic going on in cell and gene therapies, that these therapies can demonstrate early proof of concept in the clinic that can be really quite spectacularly convincing. And right now in the public markets, if anything drives value, it's data. Right. And so while I would argue that there are certain data events that haven't turned out well for our industry, there's lots of companies that are pending data later on this year, including my own. And I think head down, getting things done, executing in the clinic, and demonstrating clinical differences will ultimately drive value.
Brent, Johanna, would love to get your guys' thoughts here. Are the markets affecting your respective companies, and if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're dealing with everything that everybody else is, with the challenge of the last 18 to 24 months with the pandemic. Right now, the markets are facing additional challenges with the war, inflation, continued global supply issues. But I think the key takeaway is investor confidence remains high. I think we had record investment still last year, even though despite the pandemic, there's a high level of interest on the investment side in cell, gene, and tissue therapies. I think that's going to continue. We've had the luxury at Autolus of having a lot of IP generation, so we have over 100 patent families. We're able to use that with our business development discussions to bring in additional revenues as well. So it's really kind of tapping into all the available avenues to continue to drive the business forward and ensure that it stays viable and you have a good cash runway.
Joanna, anything to add?
In our case, we are owned by Sumitovan and Sumitomo Pharma, but the same areas of creating confidence with investors apply. The reality is that they want to see that you deliver on the promise of the technology with patients and for investors. And lately has been tough. Many programs have been delayed and some have failed. My own company, we got a CRL, a complete response from the FDA, And we were fortunate that after less than 2 years of work, we were approved. You know, as much companies show that this could bring, we can bring it to the finish line and get the drugs approved, you know, I feel that the confidence will be there. And also, if we work together on changing the things that need to be changed in the systems, like regulatory, CMC, commercial, there is a lot to be evolved from what pharma, you know, like the typical pharma drugs are to cell and gene therapy. So that will build the confidence.
Deb, something that Robert just pointed out was regarding layoffs. Not only have we seen a downturn in public markets, but we've also seen a lot of cell and gene therapy companies have layoffs. Do you think this trend will potentially continue, and how will that affect investors?
It's a really good question. This kind of makes me feel old because I feel like I've seen these cycles multiple times already. There's been a lot of money around, there's been a lot of basic work. I sort of feel like this is just a normal cycle, that people are really focused on the clinic. I think there's good drugs out there, as Robert's saying, it's really driven by the data. So certainly on the side of aiming to the clinic, I think there might be some focus. You know, I'm certainly getting a lot of feedback from clients. How can we do this tighter? How can we think innovatively? And interestingly, somebody in the earlier session mentioned about clinical trial design. I think that is absolutely key to think about how can we design this to really get the most out of one study. And I know and I'm going to sound like a broken record about immunogenicity, but building into an early study collection of all the samples that you might need on the regulatory perspective for diagnostic work, not having to go back and do a prospective study to collect those specimens. So all that type of thing, I think, is really helping us plan how we can do this. So yes, I do think money's going to be tight for the foreseeable future, but I still think there's good funds, the good therapies are going to make it into the clinic, and we all need to work to make that happen.
Yeah, Robert, one thing that Brent pointed out was using IP as a way of raising capital. Are there any other mitigation strategies that you would advise for cell and gene therapy companies that may be facing a cash crunch?
Yeah, I think my advice is raise cash when you can, and we were fortunate enough to have raised, when the window was still open. But for those in a cash crunch, I think we have to be creative right now. So that includes things like buyouts and mergers. I think in general, as was mentioned previously, our industry is essentially fairly fragmented, and it doesn't necessarily make sense for every company to build their own, manufacturing infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily make sense to, have just moderate tweaks on similar approations. And so I think consolidations are one aspect, and then of course partnering is another. The IP aspect, I think, is also fascinating as things have been playing out in the cell and gene therapy space. We've also seen more creative things around, selling or lease back of certain infrastructure, which is also an interesting concept.
Brent, aside from market pressures, no secret there have been numerous setbacks from a regulatory perspective, revealing disappointing study results, safety concerns for patients. How do you think these instances will deter investors going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the regulatory environment is evolving. I think investors know this. The FDA, EMA, other regulatory agencies are learning as we go. They continue to refine their standards and what they're looking for. So what does that mean for us? That means that we need to engage them more closely. We need to push for transparency. We need to push for timelier reviews. And we need to push for improved staffing. All of these agencies are understaffed. I know we've had delays where we've submitted packages that, it's going to be delayed 30 days. It's going to be 60 days before we can get back to you. So we need to push on this. We're doing this through ARM. We're doing this through other organizations. We need to continue to do that. We need to knock down some of those barriers. We need to identify the key points that the agencies are looking for so that it's not a surprise and it doesn't result in some type of delay. We've also seen clinical trial holds, a number of clinical trial holds this year, right? And so by having better engagement, we should be able to mitigate some of those issues.
Joanna, what was your experience like dealing with the regulatory bodies through the process that Enzavon went through?
So as you know, I'm the commercial, but I will bring forward like the work that was done by our regulatory team. So as I said before, we got a CRL, and just to give you more background, our product is engineered organ. An engineered organ that, a new manufacturing, nobody has done it before. And as we learn on how to follow the CMC procedures, also the regulators are learning. So our CRL was based on CMC issues or questions that the FDA has. And when we got the CRL, for all of us that have been in pharma for a long time, the typical next step will be to have a Type A meeting where we go and ask questions and get clarifications on what are the next steps. We normally do that because we don't want to waste time for the patients to be treated and also on the development side. But in this case, our regulatory team, knowing that there was questions from the FDA, but also a curve of learning, not only for us, but for them. Instead of having this Type A immediately after, they took the time, they thought about what could be the potential answers to the questions. The FDA knows what the regulations are, what they expect for a CMC, but they don't know all the details of how this kind of manufacturing will happen. So they met with them once they had a plan, a detailed plan of potential solutions, instead of having an early brainstorm that allowed them to educate on potential answers, but also have a plan after the meeting on what was going to be like the next steps and the framework to solve the issues. So different from what you will expect in our typical pharma experience.
Any final thoughts, Debs?
Well, I really agree with all the other three panelists are saying. The regulatory landscape clearly evolves. Certainly with work that we've been doing, we're on one path. There's feedback. No, you need to add more assays. You need to add more data. Huge fan of going to the regulatory agencies early and often, ask questions. I certainly feel in our meetings with the FDA, they're really trying to help us. They want to see these therapies on the market. I felt like there's a lot more guidance coming our way more rapidly. I know it's never fast enough, but certainly when I've been in the space with small molecules, I feel that we're getting more feedback more rapidly than we would with a small molecule. But everyone's feeling their way, and I think there's a lot of concerns about safety. So the FDA in particular is going to be conservative. That we have to be very cognizant of. There's scientific questions out there that we really haven't answered long term. And I think very much about unmet need and a rare disease versus we see gene therapies coming potentially for more common disorders. How is the regulatory agency going to look at that? How are we going to deal with that? I think we're going to be very busy for the next decade. So our funding has to keep going.
Obviously, the future of advanced medicines, changing course a little bit, is directly tied to the pricing value and reimbursement. And we all know those continue to present a challenge. With innovative pricing and reimbursement models may seem presentable on paper, once we get into the details, they're sometimes unfeasible or can't be implemented to the same degree to all different payer types, all different countries, et cetera. Johanna, based on your experience, how receptive are payers to innovative reimbursement models? What have been some of the major drivers of these implementation of these models?
Yeah. So our experience so far, and aligned with what we know in the past, is that value drives preference. So if you have a price that is based of the right value, there will be willingness to pay. And as you know, we got approved in the US in October, and our experience, is from the US. So once the value is there and demonstrated that we can provide something that is different from the standard of care and the normal life that these kids will have, then comes the issues of procedure. Like this is changing the way the systems have treated these kids, and even though it's ultra rare, it requires a lot of education. A lot of our kids are in Medicaid, not because maybe they started in Medicaid, but because of the high cost that these families go through the life of the kid, because with a lot of infections that are hospitalized constantly, and in the US they hit catastrophic and ended up in Medicaid. And with Medicaid, sometimes the health systems are concerned, like if there will be delays on payment, and there is the other concerns about the cross-state issues, that a kid is coming to a center, a center of excellence that is not in their state, and that's another complication. But at the end of the day, like what we have found is educating on our value, long-term data, and having these one-on-one conversations with payers. As we are ultra rare, we don't do contracting. It's each patient with each of the payers. So we'll have a special contract, but there is a lot of receptivity, but a lot of education to be done. They have never seen a congenital atypia patient, and they haven't seen our data, so we can't leave the healthcare center by itself to do all the education. So.
Sure. Brent, do you agree with Johanna's thoughts here?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that she said. We don't have a commercial product at this time, so we're not engaging in these types of contracts. So I would say I'm going to kind of go back to the data plug, if you will, and it's data. It's generating real-world evidence to support your product and your value proposition. And I think that's a global issue. There needs to be a global infrastructure and framework set up around what is appropriate real-world evidence to support your small single-arm study, right? So that the payers don't use the data against you. We need a harmonized approach across stakeholders. Right now, if I look at the US, if I look at the EU, if I look at the UK, Japan, everybody has a different idea of what evidence is appropriate. If I look within the EU, in Germany, France, it's different. They have disparate policies, disparate approaches, and we need to standardize that. We need to align on what's acceptable across those stakeholders so that we can use those data to support our packages and to support the value proposition of our products.
Well, data is going to be key, right? So, I mean, the first thing that when we're obviously, it's unmet medical need, but it's going to be what stage of the patients that we're treating. They're going to demand efficacy data. So if it's a genetic disorder, if you treat, a 6-month child, will that get the same effect as if the child is 1 year? Having all that data and thinking about cost benefit. I mean, we haven't derived that data yet. And I think this is obviously going to be expensive. Hopefully it's a one and done. Hopefully we don't have to retreat, but that's a whole nother issue as to how we would do that. But I really think payers are going to want to understand, will this particular patient benefit? And that runs the gamut from, what does pre-existing immunity mean? What's the stage of the disorder? What's the penetration of the gene deficit? I just think there are going to be so many different variables for every therapy that we're really going to have to put that data together to be able to get reimbursement from all these different health agencies.
Commenting on data, Robert, how early do you start thinking about this? Even though you don't have a commercial product today, do you start thinking about it now?
We started thinking about commercialization and value over a year before we went in the clinic. We felt strongly enough, we actually hired the Brent or Johanna version of in vore, our Chief Commercial Officer, John King, we hired about a year and a half ago. And he really just brings a totally different perspective in terms of how you demonstrate data, when you do that, and then how you think about that across different geographies, different stakeholders. And so that degree of thinking, I just urge everyone, you can't think about it early enough.
Yeah, I would agree.
Debs, you had mentioned more prevalent disorders earlier,
Right.
treating more prevalent disorders earlier rather than rare disease. How is this going to affect this paradigm? How will this shift this paradigm when we're treating more prevalent disorders?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. I assume if we're going after more prevalent disorders, cost of goods would come down. You would certainly be thinking about what is it going to cost to treat these patients. But again, it comes down to data, comes down to cost benefit. If you've got somebody with cardiovascular disorders, they're going to live somewhat chronically ill 10, 15 years. If you can modify that with a therapy, but again, you'll have to put all that data together. Certainly right now, I think all the proof of concepts are in the rarer disorders, but people are definitely going to go after the more common disorders. Why not? I mean, it's a good therapeutic model, but in terms of payer reimbursement, it's going to be data-driven.
Joanna, how will the industry deal with some other questions about data, such as durability and long-term data requests?
So again, to build on our case, what we have found is that definitely they want to see outcomes, clinical outcomes that are like really differentiated versus the standard of care or like the normal life of these patients. And in our case, as I have described, it's a very difficult journey that is very difficult for the families, not only because the kid is sick, but also they need to isolate as to avoid infections, but also to the healthcare system. It causes a lot of hospitalizations and different kind of expenses. So when we combine that with the fact that we have more than 25 years of data, and I think this is an important point. Sometimes when we work with academia, we think the data they have could be good enough, but we're clinical trials that were before, and what we have done at NCVAN is taking the data they have, work with them for 5 years, trying to identify ways that the knowledge that they have could be combined with new data that could lead to an approval of the FDA and in other regulatory bodies. So with that work that we did, we were able to combine information of 105 patients, more than 800 years of experience for this very ultra-rare disease, and that give us give us very tangible information of life expectancy and survival for these kids. So it's easy to have a picture that shows that your outcomes are very strong. Obviously, I understand that for other therapies that don't have this partnership with academia or you don't have the experience to have all this data, it's difficult. But I would say that the point is that make sure that you demonstrate that you want to find that data, that it's not going to be based on exploratory, or extrapolations from other data or surrogates, that the regulatory bodies and payers want to see that you are going to invest on finding that data, because that is the promise of regenerative medicine, that we can make it tangible. So I think that's kind of the reason why we feel that we are having positive reaction from payers. It's very tangible, and it could be difficult for other ones, but doesn't mean that could not be done to at least plan for the future. And I think I was in the other talk about European authorities and what they were looking at, very similar. They want to see there is a promise of very tangible data production. So.
Speaking of the future, Brent, right now we have a handful of cell and gene therapies that have been approved. And according to ARM, there's going to be 6 expected approvals this year, and then according to the FDA, 10 to 25 by the year 2025, which I feel like it's pretty aggressive. How will payers react to the cost of these therapies as more and more therapies hit the market?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think for the most part, the payer response has been favorable for the most part.
Right.
When we look at it. And again, they're learning as we go, because the system wasn't created to handle these personalized medicines that are one-time administration, meant to last a lifetime, paid for up front. So everybody's trying to get their arms around this. I think everybody needs to come together to do that. I think when we look at the new products that are coming down the pipeline, and there are so many products in development right now, The payers are trying to get their arms around it. They want to engage with you as quickly as possible. They have their own pipeline tracking that they're doing to try to look at these. They also look at, is it ultra rare? Is it rare? Is it a broader population because of the actuarial implications to them in designing their benefit packages? But as the new products are introduced and they continue to move through their clinical development cycle, I think if they're priced similarly in line with the existing therapies, I don't think there'll probably be too many issues with the payers. But we need to stay on top of the payers and how they're thinking, understand the right ways to engage, the timing to engage, to ensure that we have a favorable review and favorable access for patients.
Thanks, Brent. Turning to manufacturing, obviously the future of advanced medicines depends on manufacturing, depends on us solving this capacity crunch that we're facing today. Robert, would love to hear from you on what's Vore's manufacturing strategy been and how have you addressed any bottlenecks in your manufacturing?
Yeah, so we chose to invest in our own manufacturing facility. To be clear, we've been using a wonderful CDMO for cell therapy manufacturing to date, and they're still making product for us as we enter the clinic. But at the same time, we know the benefits of owning your own process and actually being the master of your own destiny. And so we have assembled a fairly modest manufacturing facility made up of 4 clean rooms. Each of them can take virus or not. They can handle both work in CAR-T as well as hematopoietic stem cell products. And so that will tide us over through late stage development, at which time we'll need to switch to a commercial facility. But we have the luxury of doing that given the capital that we raised, but something that we felt was a really important deployment of capital as we invest in our future.
Brent, obviously Autolus has employed both strategies, internal and external. What is the right strategy for cell and gene therapy developers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's really organization specific, right? Because there's a number of factors that you have to look at. You have to look at your resourcing. You have to look at your cash available on hand. Mm-hmm. You can either invest in a manufacturing facility and build that capability yourself. You can buy it. You can lease it. You could choose to invest that money into advancing your other clinical development programs, which then would enable you to raise more capital. It's also a timing question.
Robert's making a plea for consolidation, remember?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so I mean, we look at all of these things, whether it's manufacturing personalized medicine, whether it's manufacturing your own viral vector. So these are all very important questions that each organization needs to look inward and ask the right questions to determine what is the best course for them.
Sure. The clock's almost to the drinks reception, so I want to ask you guys for one last question. It's been great to be here because it reaffirms my faith in the cell and gene therapy sector. I think the overall sentiment that I've heard everybody say is there's still a positive outlook regardless of what the markets are telling us right now. We just have to become more creative, more innovative, which I don't think anybody in this room has a problem with being more innovative and creative. I would love to hear from you on what are you guys excited about in the future for either the company or the sector. Johanna?
So I would say I'm excited to hear that there is talk about, like when you are launching a drug, like there are so many areas that you want to change and educate, and to be able to hear throughout today and hopefully tomorrow, all the companies that are dedicated to work on that, because there are changes that need to be done, as Brent was saying, like going from one therapy that is done once and is changing the life of this kid. In our case, he's gonna live their life, change from like having months to live, and but it requires a lot of education and change on how like payers are going to pay, the doctors are going to treat the patients, and even the way that families will treat this disease and help educate other ultra rare patients. So a lot to be done, and it can be done like just with one company. So I'm excited to hear that there is a lot of energy towards moving forward with cell and gene therapy.
Yep.
So,
Brent?
Yeah, so let me kind of address external and internal. So from an external standpoint, it's really exciting to see some of the first generation therapies moving up in line of therapy. There's even talk in certain parts of the world about these becoming new standard of care, and so that would be very breakthrough. That would be well received by the investment community. I also like the energy and urgency behind all the stakeholders updating the way they approach ATMPs, whether it's through the EU Pharma legislation, whether it's addressing cross-border issues, whether it's pan-European HTA assessments, all of these things. It's good that we're having the discussion. It gives us a chance to influence and shape these policies and the way that moves forward. From an Autolus perspective, I'm very excited this year just about us moving our pipeline forward. We'll fully enroll our pivotal study for obe-cel, which is our adult ALL product this year. We're also going to be advancing our Auto4 program, which is a multifunctional next generation product for peripheral T-cell lymphoma, which is very exciting. It uses several different modules from a manufacturing standpoint, from a safety switch to several modules blocking escape mechanisms that the tumor typically employs, to our Auto6 for multiple myeloma, and other products that we have in development. So very exciting news for us this year as well.
That's amazing. Debs?
Well, it's really hard to pick one thing.
Yeah.
I think something I'm personally excited about is some of the late-stage therapies that I hope are going to launch the end of this year, next year. Thinking particular gene therapy for hemophilia. Knowing that therapy is going into adults. They've been exposed to recombinant proteins for years of their lives. They've been exposed to adenoviral, just general infections. How is that going to affect how they respond to the gene therapy? I think once we get to put these therapies into a much larger population, we're going to learn so much about how to do this that I'm really excited to see more people get dosed with these novel therapies. So fingers crossed that they're going to launch soon.
Robert, what are you excited about?
Well, I think that we shouldn't be afraid to aim high. We're in a tough business. Many facets of our business are really difficult. At the same time, we're doing this for patients, right? And these patients need therapies, and they need therapies that are durable and potentially curative. And I don't use that C word lightly, right? But cures are what we should be aiming for. And so we've seen recently, Carl June's published, patients who have CAR Ts floating around for the last 10 years, and they're doing great. And this is just the tip of the iceberg and something that we really should aim towards. So one other thing that I just want to plug, I mentioned this at the meeting on the Mesa last year, and I just want to encourage us as a community, as an alliance, that we should be helping each other. So this means that, when you get the call from a company that could even be a potential competitor, or at least is a colleague in your space, and say, hey, we ran into this issue, or, do you know this person? Could you connect us here? Or, what are your thinking? What's your current thinking on any particular topic? Let's help each other out, right? We should be here for each other because goodness knows we need the help, and we should be doing more things such as ARM and initiatives where we can be acting as a community to really help each other and society at large.
Well, I think that's why meetings such as this are so important, where we can share knowledge within each other, we can share best practices, and have an opportunity to see leaders like you guys all share your experiences and the roadblocks that you face and how you mitigated them. So thank you guys, and thank you to ARM for giving us this opportunity to talk today, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.